The United States is the most powerful river power and land power in history. Conforming to the technologies of the time, the American colonies were all agricultural in nature. None of them were what we would call breadbaskets in the contemporary sense. The New England colonies of Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire suffered from thin, rocky soils, often cloudy weather, and short summers, limiting farming options. Wheat was a hard no. Corn was a meh. The core agricultural economy was a mix of whaling, fishing, forestry, and fireball, or whatever nasty brown liquor they could distill back then. Georgia and the Carolinas enjoyed more farm-friendly weather, broadening and bettering agricultural options, but the soil was poor in a different way. Piedmont soil's primary inputs are the decayed remnants of the Appalachians, clay high in minerals, but not necessarily bursting with organic nutrients. The natural result was roving production, with farmers clearing land, growing crops on it for a few seasons until the nutrient profile was exhausted, and then moving on to a new patch. Staying in one place necessitated hand-applied fertilization, which is back-breaking work in any era. Non-standard employment models such as indentured servitude and slavery took root in the South because of the need to improve soil chemistry as much as anything else. The best farmland of the original 13 resided in the middle Atlantic colonies of Maryland, Pennsylvania, Virginia, New York, and New Jersey. But we aren't talking about Iowa, Midwestern, or Pampas, Argentinian, or Beauce, French levels of quality. Calling New Jersey the Garden State has pretty much always elicited eye rolls. They were only considered good due to a lack of competition. In addition to these colonies having the least bad mix of land and weather, they also sported the bulk of the colony's useful maritime frontage: the Chesapeake and Delaware Bays, Long Island Sound, and the Hudson and Delaware Rivers. The dense waterway network encouraged concentrations of populations, aka towns, and townies don't farm. Less than ideal setups for farming, combined with geographic nudges in the general direction of urbanization, pushed the hardscrabble colonists in decidedly non-agricultural directions, leading to value-added products like crafts and textiles, something that put them into de facto economic conflict with Britain, who saw that particular part of the imperial economy as something the imperial center was supposed to dominate. It's a pattern we will see over and over and over right up to the naked now. Who gets to do the high value-added work is still something we fight about today. Such employments generate not simply the highest wages, but the fastest technological and capital builds and the largest tax bases. The patchwork and shifting nature of agriculture in the colonies required some serious logistical ballet. Most local food distribution occurred via coastal maritime traffic. It was the cheapest and most effective means of moving goods among largely coastal colonial population centers. When the Revolution arrived in 1775, things got decidedly animated, as the Americans' colonial overlord controlled the world's most powerful navy. Many colonial Americans went hungry for 6 long years. The American Revolution may have been successful in the end, but the economics of the new nation was, in a word, questionable. Expansion solved most everything. The Greater Midwest by itself boasts 200,000 square miles of the world's most fertile farmland, larger than the total land area of Spain. Midwestern soils are thick, deep prairie soils laden with nutrients. The Midwest is squarely in the temperate zone. Winter brings insect kills, which keep pests under control, limiting pesticide costs as well as forcing an annual soil regeneration and decomposition process that limits fertilizer needs. The full 4-season experience all but guarantees ample precipitation, including snow in the winter, which typically supplies adequate soil moisture and regulates supplemental irrigation to the region's western fringes. The initial American cross-Appalachian migration wave funneled through the Cumberland Gap, leaving the most concentrated footprint in the Ohio Territory. Ohio had access to the Great Lakes, so it behooved the New Yorkers to construct the Erie Canal in order to ship in Ohioan agricultural bounty via the Hudson. The next big migration wave fanned out from Ohio into what is today Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin, and Missouri. It was far easier, and cheaper, for the new Midwesterners to send their grain west and south via the Ohio and Mississippi rivers to New Orleans. From there, it was a cheap, easy, albeit long sail via America's barrier islands' intracoastal route to Mobile and Savannah and Charleston and Richmond and Baltimore and New York and Boston. Between the Great Lakes and the greater Mississippi, everyone in those first two big settlement waves landed within 150 miles of the world's greatest navigable waterway system on some of the world's best farmland. The math was pretty easy. For the equivalent cost of a contemporary low-end hatchback, about $12,500 in 2020 money, a family could obtain a land grant from the government, Conestoga themselves out to the new territories, break ground, farm, and within several months be exporting high-quality grain. The Midwestern settlement proved utterly transformative, both for the new territories and the original 13, in a host of ways. With the twin exceptions of shortages related to the British blockades during the War of 1812 and Confederate governmental collapse in the Civil War aftermath, famine is something continental Americans have zero experience with as an independent country. Food production is simply too reliable, too omnipresent, and America's internal transport system too efficient and effective for famine to be a meaningful concern. With the North able to access foodstuffs from the Midwest, most of the Middle Atlantic and nearly all the New England fields returned to forest, with what agriculture that remained tending to be in Midwestern inappropriate specialty crops like grapes, apples, potatoes, sweet corn, blueberries, and cranberries. This de-agriculturalization process freed up labor to throw at other projects like industrialization. Midwestern growth also nudged the South into cash crops. Growing indigo, cotton, or tobacco is far more labor-intensive than growing wheat or corn. The Midwest didn't have the labor to pull it off, but courtesy of slavery, the South did. Each region of the country specialized in outputs based on its own local economic geography, with water transport enabling cheap and omnipresent intrastate trade, generating economies of scale heretofore unheard of in the human experience. All the land in the new Midwest was high quality, so there were no massive gaps between settled areas like there were in the Appalachians. This relatively dense settlement pattern, combined with the region's high productivity and low transport costs, naturally led to the formation of the heartland small-town culture. Small banks popped up throughout the Mississippi system to manage the capital generated from product sales to the East Coast and Europe. Financial depth soon became a defining American characteristic. This not only enabled steady expansions in Midwestern agriculture in terms of territory and productivity, but it also provided Middle America with the capital required to bootstrap early regional development in terms of infrastructure and education. The easy movement of people and goods throughout the river network forced Americans to interact with one another regularly, contributing to the unification of American culture despite a wide variety of ethnic backgrounds. The Civil War obviously interrupted this process. The Midwest lost access to the Mississippi intercoastal shipping route until the war's end. But by the beginning of Reconstruction in the late 1860s, farmer density in the Midwest had reached a critical mass, and the steady stream of agricultural products reaching the East Coast became a flood. What had always been the most densely populated and industrialized portion of the country no longer had to worry about producing its own food at all. And all that Midwestern grain generated massive capital inflows to the United States, amping up industrialization and urbanization processes that were already lumbering forward. Beyond economics and culture and finance and trade and structure, there are security issues to consider as well. America's territory is the very definition of safe. To the north, deep, rugged forests and giant lakes separate most American and Canadian population centers. Only once, in the War of 1812, have the Americans fought their northern neighbors. Even that should be more accurately considered as a war with the Canadians' then current colonial master, who at the time was the world's military superpower than one between the Yanks and the Mounties themselves. In the 2 centuries since the war, American-Canadian hostility has gradually given way to not simply neutrality or friendship, but an evolution into alliance and brotherhood, complete with all the familiar spats for which brothers are famous. The American-Canadian border today is the least patrolled and longest undefended border in the world. America's southern frontier is actually more secure against conventional military attack. The fact that illegal immigration across America's southern border is an issue in American politics underlies just how hostile that border is to formal state power. Rugged, high-altitude barrens like the American-Mexican border region are among the most difficult topographies in which to maintain meaningful populations, provide government services, or even to build basic infrastructure. Fun fact: the Trump administration's efforts to build a meaningful border wall first required the establishment of a web of roads for the wall's construction and maintenance. That new infrastructure made drug smuggling and illegal migration easier, not more difficult. Military action in such an unforgiving, remote area has never been anything other than borderline suicidal. The single large-scale invasion across the border, that of Santa Anna in 1835-36, in his attempt to crush the Texican Rebellion, so innervated the Mexican army that it was roundly defeated by an irregular force half its size, guaranteeing success to the Texican secessionists. No wonder that a decade later, during the Mexican-American War of 1846-48, the Americans simply waited until the bulk of the Mexican army was past the point of no return in its second attempt at crossing the border deserts before using naval forces to drop troops at Veracruz. One bloody 250-mile march later, and the Mexican capital was in American hands.